Hi everybody, my name is Russell Thackeray and welcome to this short webinar about leadership, leadership resilience and perhaps the need for more tough love in leadership. And the reason for doing this webinar was that a number of people have spoken to me recently about resilience and webinar to do with our training and research and such like. And I thought it'd be a good idea to sort of capture some ideas and spread them around a little bit more widely, stimulate some conversation. Feedback, of course, any's welcome. So this webinar will be about 25-30 minutes, maybe 20 minutes long. There will be a copy afterwards, and those of you who prefer to listen on audio, obviously you don't need to watch the screen so much. My voice hopefully adds value to the slides rather than the other way around. So there's nothing really vital to see in the moment, but I know for some of you who like to see the slides and make sure that you can activate your auditory and visual preferences at the same slide, then there's plenty for you there. This is a series of webinars, and other webinars can be found at qedod.com. You can contact me directly at russell@qedod.com. I'm always happy to hear from people. If you want to talk to us about doing some work for you, obviously clearly delighted. If you have feedback, if you have questions, or if you have any other requests in terms of subjects you think we should cover for you, then I'm very happy to do that. So time is rolling on, so I'm going to disappear so I don't have to watch myself doing this. Sadly, it's somewhat distracting and it allows me to change my glasses. I'm afraid I'm a person of a certain age that needs another pair of glasses to read the screen. So what I'm going to do is disappear and we'll get started straight away, and hopefully this has some value for you, and I hope you enjoy. So I shall be back at the end and we'll see you then. So just bear with me as I do some technical stuff. Here we go. So that's hopefully without my face, so you can't see what I'm up to as I change my glasses and get started. Okay. So here's the plan for today. I'm going to talk just for a recap very, very quickly about who we are, what we do, and get that out of the way so we can get on to the main subjects in hand. It's important for those of you who haven't seen us to know what we do and what we're about, and some of the conceptual thinking behind what we're about. So something about that. Some commentary around potential performance change growth, obviously, and some thinking around resilience, how it works generally, but also specifically for leaders and what leaders need to be doing better. It doesn't cover everything to do with leadership, and it's not everything to do with resilience. It's a sort of slant from my thinking today or the last few days about how to gather together some of the commentary that I've been discussing with people in commerce at the moment. So just to, as a quick recap, we see resilience as being fundamentally about performance. It's not a nice to have, it's vital to have. We provide toolkits to help people grow. We're online, and we have a number of totally online solutions, but we also do face-to-face work and online coaching, as well as online and a lot of face-to-face training and presenting and short sessions. So some people like us to pop in and just do a sort of soapbox session for a team, maybe for 30 minutes or 90 minutes or something. That's fine. Also our full-scale programs. Some people like our train the trainer programs as well, because we have measures of resilience that people seem to enjoy learning about. So just to recap, resilience, of course, is famously about bouncing back and performing after times of adversity. But for me, resilience is also about dealing with pressure, stress, and performing in the moment. It's no good falling apart and coming back strong and falling apart. The idea is that resilience gives you the wherewithal to be able to continue performing. I mean, nobody thinks that, no one's naive enough to think that during times of adversity that performance continues unhindered, but it's about making sure that performance does actually continue at the most possible and most efficient manner. In order to do that, obviously we need to invest in the good times, but notice when our own and other people's resilience is being compromised. And so we call this the gear change, because what you'll see will be recognizable symptoms and recognizable things you can start to spot. And of course, in the good times, we build the capacity. And what we're thinking about, or what I'm thinking about today in terms of leadership resilience, is really a lot about capacity rather than actually it's all gone wrong and what do we do now. It's much more about how do we stop it going wrong in the first place. And the good thing about strategy and such like is risk mitigation. There's a bunch of benefits around resilience, stress reduction, well-being, reduced absence, and really, as I said, it's about performance. I mean, the case for good well-being, wellness, all that sort of stuff is one. The issue now is just persuading people that it's a vital part of everybody's job. This is our model. As you can see, we see potential as being really important, and the four aspects of potential are those four things: of personality, physiology, emotion, and cognition. Building resilience in all those areas, and we help people by turning those into usable toolkits called the ropes toolkit, which are things like regulation, optimism, purpose, energy, and stamina, all things which are learnt, all things which are competence areas, things that can be managed and measured and developed. And that's good news. And those things obviously turn into resilience. And if you multiply resilience together with competence, you have enhanced or increased performance. So that's where we come from. We see the first stage of resilience as being around self-awareness. So knowing yourself, your feelings, your emotions, spoken word. And one of the challenges for leaders is that often we spend a lot of time developing leaders to be better at managing or leading other people without that basic toolkit of knowing themselves. And there's something really interesting, because obviously we need leaders to be congruent, we need them to do what they say. And so often these days I'm seeing people over-promising and under-delivering, both in terms of reward or the removal of reward, threats, for example. And I think leaders have to get a grip of themselves first before they have the let loose sometimes on the workforce. And often you'll see people coming back from training courses all fired up and pumped up, and then trying to implement things, and there's no sort of rigor in that deployment of new learning, so it embeds and it really begins to stick. And some of that's the fault of the way that training is delivered and evaluated itself, but often it's just that there's a lack of seeing things through that seems to be prevalent at the moment, and that's something we need to have a think about. So let's look at some of these early warning signs just to start with. And these are useful for yourself, but to start spotting in other people. And really the key in this is to be really focused on behaviour. Now, it sounds obvious to talk about behaviour, but really I was working with a group of people last week, and when it got down to it, they talk all the time about behaviours, but were really unclear about what one was, how you measure it, and how you set a standard around it. So when you're leading and talking about behaviours, if there is no standard around those behaviours, well, how do you know when things have changed? And again, that sounds simple but complex to actually operate and put into practice. And so there's a lot of leadership discipline about helping people understand what a behaviour is, how you notice it, how you spot it, how you objectively measure it, and how you spot the changes. And some of these things here are all spottable, but only if you're looking. And if you're looking for them as well. So it's really important that you listen to people, talk to them. I call it the green cross code in a way. Listen, look both ways before crossing the road, and actually means just looking to see what's coming at you. But people's self-confidence is often a sign that self-esteem is being eroded, and that's really important, because if you're a perfectionist or someone who's over-controlling of other people and not really thinking about yourself, your confidence will diminish as your lack of control begins to really be exacerbated. And if you're a perfectionist, that's a problem as well, because you're over-delivering against the needs of the organisation. The key to this idea is resilience and high anxiety go together, because they both generate this sort of stress response, and that's something we need to really be working with in terms of leaders and managers. While stress is a sort of fashionable thing and it's sort of, again, corrupted in terms of its meaning, real stress is something we need to combat, or the negative effects of that, the stress polluting toxins that exist in your body. Oh, and of course, whilst recognising that stress is a physiological response, and that drives good things as well. So it's understanding the tipping point where positive or eustress turns into the negative aspects of it through the cortisol toxicity in your physiology. And so hopefully that helps a little bit. The drain from blame thing is that actually is very tiring to blame other people, because actually you need to know where you need to manage your optimism, manage your energy from learning from things which are going wrong, which means there needs to be a culture where things going wrong is tolerated, once certainly, and then development is given so people can get better. Again, I say these things and you might be sitting in your organisation thinking, well, we do all that, but trust me, I do see other organisations where this is not the norm. This is why I want to talk about it. So a lot about anxiety comes from the external world, and there's a lot going on at the moment. There's Brexit, as we know, which is creating all sorts of uncertainty, and that's led, of course, the current situation in the UK, the political situation. And there's a huge problem at the moment because what with terrible effects of, say, Grenfell Tower and some of the terrorism incidents, there's a real sense of unease in the UK. And that's also going on in the US as well. There's a lot of turmoil in the world. The Middle East is bubbling away. There's still the sort of terrorism in the wider world. And, the sort of things that are going on in Asia means that if you're in an international company, there's no sphere that's sort of particularly calm and settled. So, and it's not that there's actually something tangible happening. It seems as if we're sort of in the calm before the storm. And one of the biggest problems here is that in the economic cycle, we know, there's we're sort of ready for an economic slowdown or turn down, and we're seeing early evidence of that. And we need to be ready. We need to be strategic as leaders to be thinking, well, how do we ready ourselves and our people to make the best of what's coming? And of course, what's happening to a lot of people is heading full tilt into the next series of problems rather than getting ourselves ready for them. And the media have a huge role in this and have a huge role to play in the issue and the exacerbation of the problem. And there's no doubt that in terms of anxiety management, just turning off 24-hour news channels, turning off your sort of news feed on Facebook and Instagram is a very good thing. Going social media free every now and then, certainly on the news channels, is really important because there is a sort of river of toxicity flowing through the media at the moment. And, it just doesn't take long to listen to the media for long to realise actually that's the source of much of our anxiety. I mean, they have a vested interest in stoking up the anxiety and, and whilst there's a lot going on in the world which is negative, we very rarely hear the good stuff as well. We very rarely hear the really good bits of news which are hidden away in the media and don't get sort of talked about much. And that's a shame. And we need to find that in our own lives to remind ourselves that actually life overall for human beings at the moment as a race is pretty good. And we sort of forget that. But the overall outcome seems to be troubled. And what we are doing is seeing rises in things like mental health problems and rises in stress. And some of that's because we're measuring it differently, and some of it is actually because genuinely people seem a little bit more troubled at the moment. There's a perception of a lack of control and a perception of the stress burden raising. And so it's time to take some action now before it becomes an issue. So my old boss used to say, spot the issues before they turn into problems. And I think that's what we're trying to do here in building capacity. So let's think a little bit about how that works. I mean, if you look at it like a meta leadership model, which is, sort of taking every sort of version of leadership and creating one model that resembles that. Leadership nearly always seems to be about the future, creating the organizational structure, the slack in the organization to deal with that future, and then driving effectiveness, delivering results. And there's all sorts of stylistic changes that you might use to do that: engagement, performance, inspiration, all that sort of stuff. But they all actually have these things in common. Even future, engage, deliver, situational leadership, John Adair, whatever you want, they all have this sort of at the heart. And when you think about this, a lot of these leadership theories go to the 30s, the 60s, some in the 80s. So we need to be a little bit more aware of the new things which are popping out of neuroscience, for example, and neuroleadership, and it's worth having a look at some of the things because these old leadership models aren't helping us with some of these things. So what we're seeing is a real rise in sensitivity. Now this is just from people being more self-aware through things like mindfulness and general sort of personal development becoming more embedded in our cultures, through to actually recognized high sensitivity as a superpower or condition which is genetically in people. And of course, that sensitivity allows them to be more empathetic, but also more sensitive to external events. And hence, this is an issue. And leaders don't always see that the people who are often described as high need or high maintenance are simply highly sensitive to external events and need to operate within a different culture in order to get the best out of them. And it's a bit of a problem if leaders don't recognize that and see the advantages in that. There's also a war for talent. We've talked about the war for talent for 15, 20 years, but it's changing now because With the changes in mobility across markets, what we'll have is a smaller and shrinking market. Even if we have a smaller and shrinking economy, the two things work together. So you don't get more talent in a shrinking market because there is less people in that market that have all the talent. So what we need to do is, making sure we're creating cultures in which people can do their best work. And I know it's easy to use these and spout these cliches, but it's true. We have to blend together the soft and caring approach with the tough and accountability side of leadership, because good people with high potential want that. They want to know when they're doing well, and you can't do that unless you're building an environment when they can understand when they're doing well as where things need to be improved. So that's important. There's no doubt that complication and complexity it's all over the place at the moment, and partly that's because we've had a good time recently. The last few years have been actually, relatively speaking, great. Interest rates have been low. Apart from currency, it's been smashing, because actually we've had a long period where we can launch new initiatives. Volumes have been rising in terms of sales activity. You'll find that operational improvement hasn't had to be quite as rigorous as it needs to be, and what's been happening is things have been pretty good, and therefore things have been getting more complicated, because actually that's the nature of things in the good times. We tend to do more and more. I was talking to one person the other day who's telling me he had 47 KPIs. Given the idea of a KPI is that you have 1 or 2, maybe 5, why would you have 47? Because how on earth do you decide which is your focus today? And that's one of the challenges. And it certainly, I've been noticing the rise of project management officers again, change management initiatives again, and the duplication that comes in organizations from a rise in matrix management. And all of this gets in the way of clarity, and that gets in the way of leaders doing their best work themselves. I was working with an organization who've been doing some transformation and haven't been able to make a decision for 6 months because of the transformation issue. And at the end of the transformation issue, they decided not to do the transformation. So that was all wasted, all just a waste of time, really. And what we've sort of doing is taking a lot of the responsibility of operational management away from operational managers and putting them into exclusive or elite project groups, which actually don't mean that anything changes, nor does the operational management competence rise. So we've really got to start thinking through this, because complexity is no use. Memory is one of the things which is quite interesting. Very few people seem to remember 2008 and 2009. It doesn't seem that long ago to me, but actually there's a whole new, almost a new generation of people coming into the workforce who've no idea what it's like to be in the difficult times. And I was working with a group of people recently who were complaining about the fact that things were getting difficult. And my point was, actually this is the point where real talent shines, because real talent is able to deal with adversity. They're able to learn from actually having to innovate to deal with difficult situations. And a lot of people would rather sit and complain about the fact that customers are more difficult, or the market's more complex, rather than actually seeing it as a chance to do things differently. And that's really important. And which leadership model deals with that? And one of the key things you talk about, I listen to now, is people telling me how they have so little time. Even this point now, when you meet people and say, how are you? And they say, we're busy. In the old days, we used to say, we're fine. Now we just say we're busy all the time. And actually, this is a real issue for leaders and managers, because actually we've become accepting of that as a reason for doing something. In fact, that reason has now turned into an excuse. So it's okay now to say, well, why aren't you doing this? It's because I'm busy, because I didn't have time. Okay. And there seems to be no challenge of that, because actually where you spend your time is your choice, because everyone has the same amount of it. And I'm being told I'm overly simplistic, but actually, as we go on, hopefully I'll explain that a little bit more. And it does frustrate me that change has been something we've attempted to train, and I see a lot of the change models actually just replicating the issues of fast change in people, rather than recognizing that change takes the time it takes. So acknowledging that, so that allows change to take root, rather than trying to force it through or drive it through. And obviously this issue around relationships. Relationships have been allowed to, and team relationships have allowed to be compromised and develop toxicity because of the lack of focus and purpose. We've lost the sight that relationships at work are about creating synergy, rather than just creating complacency and like. And so I think there's something around, re-engineering some of our approaches to some of these issues. So let's turn the page and think about what we mean by tough love. It's simple, really, and I don't want this to be overcomplicated. And I recognise, of course, tough love isn't being bullying or unpleasant or nasty. It's really about being adult and treating people as adults and giving people the ability to be adult. I think often we're so worried about saying something that might upset someone or hurt their feelings, we don't tell them. And therefore we're automatically not treating them as adults. And we're allowing people not to be adults. And I think it's a real issue. And what's happening here is we're trying to control other people by not giving them the facts and the evidence and not allowing them the wherewithal to make the decisions they need to make for themselves. And we need to allow people to stand up for themselves. We need to actually understand that we need to be, in a tough market, really pragmatic about what we do. And we need to get back to the idea of accountability. And ROI is the critical thing. If you don't know the ROI in your own job, of the impact you make at what point doing certain issues, then that's key. It's a very simple thing, for example, to think about all the things you use, all the tools, the techniques, the processes that drive performance both in yourself and others, and then simply make a list of them, then figure out which creates the biggest impact over the shortest amount of time. And I've done this regularly with people, and they identify it, and then I say, well, where are you spending your time? And it's never on that thing. It's always on something else, somebody else's agenda. So when we're thinking about our impact, our return on our salary, our return for the rewards we are given or earn, then we're often not thinking shrewdly enough about where we spend our time and generate that impact. Obviously, and I say obviously, but I really want to stress this point, we're all about these things. I am a firm believer that inspiration, engagement, potential, management, stimulation, and effective use is a key part of resilience. And I really believe in this point about difference. Difference stimulates conflict. It stimulates professional disagreements where you can discuss things, and then from that passionate engagement with subjects and difference with people, generate a different solution. Too often we're sitting down in groups and having discussions which simply reinforce the status quo rather than allowing us to be different. There's too much emphasis on the same and agreement and not disagreeing, because actually we want a harmonious workforce, rather than recognizing that difference creates a harmonious workforce, because it's about recognition of each other's difference. I mean, clearly there are rules and ground rules and ways of doing that, because actually we don't want the conflict to turn into personal conflict, but obviously it needs to be managed. So I think the big leadership agenda is about seeing change as a competence. Let's ingrain it in people. Let's see it as competence driven, as rather than being a specific event. We need to understand the ROI of our time as leaders, where we spend our focus. And we need to spend a lot of time simplifying both processes, but also the promises we're making. Let's stop promising many things and under-delivering on them. Let's promise few things and really, really actually knock them out of the park. I think simplification as we move forward into more difficult times is key, because if we don't do less well, what we'll end up doing is doing more badly. And that means there'll be less of us to do that, because actually the only way to steady the ship will be to just remove people. And it's time we sort of got around that. And I think we really need to think about how we create an edge. I think we need an edge in both soft and hard senses. The hard sense in terms of cutting through the issues, simplifying, getting through red tape. I think we need to be edgy. I think we need to be a bit more on message, be in the moment, looking at new things. Let's see the advantages of social media and whole digital learning environment and the sort of immediacy of message and new ideas and taking risks now whilst we still can. We can still invest in great R&D and ideas because the cash is still around. It won't be around forever, especially if you don't invest. And we need to have an advantage. We need to take the advantage in our people and really maximize that. And so demeaning people for being overly sensitive is a problem. We need to create the cultures where everyone can actually thrive. And the pressure in the market is going to make things tougher. So we need to be treating people like adults and allowing them to step up. So we need to allow them to be accountable. We know that we need to be accountable ourselves, and we need to understand what the impacts of accountability are all about. So let's get to that, and let's be congruent. Let's do what we say. I mean, I've just worked with an organization. I've talked about values. incessantly about the values of spending time on development. And during a period of development, everyone was interrupted at least 3 or 4 times by their need to report information during that process. Now, let's stop pretending. Either forget the value or deliver the value, but don't do both, because as soon as you start saying that, you raise the cynicism levels in people, and why do that? So cognitive toughness is something we need to develop. We need to develop the thinking skills that come from really knowing yourself well, managing your feelings, managing your emotions, understanding your sensations and the feelings you have that come from those, and driving your reactions to change and to anxiety and such like, where it's possible so to do. And using new ideas like SCARF to help us. SCARF is a great idea. Understanding status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Those of you looking at the screens can see a better definition of this. But what's interesting is most people who are concerned with status see that status as the most important thing in terms of motivation and change. And what's interesting, of course, is that we've used status as a way of rewarding and remunerating people for such a long time. Status can be a financial or a recognition, soft or hard process. But most people are interested in certainty and fairness. And on a UK sample of 7,500 people recently, the biggest thing that came back was certainty, and status was much lower down the chain. So we have to think of motivation and our complexity around change as being more important and less than our status. And that's tricky, because if you're status driven yourself, that makes no sense. But there's a ton of neuroscience evidence that supports this model now, and it seems silly as leaders that we don't really get to grips with it. So a few things to think about to help us think about this building resilience, both in ourselves and other people. Wellness is performance. Let's really take wellness into the workplace. Not just drinking water and such like, but actually beyond the fruit bowl. Let's really see wellness as actually the capacity to build cognitive process by having the energy needed to really enhance the operation of the brain. That's what we're talking about here. If the brain's enhanced, you get better thinking, better cognition, better emotional control, and higher performance. Seems obvious when you say it, but yet we don't think about that. It's time to really get back to the leadership message of owning the message, owning the stepping up and owning what's going on through the organization. If values are being disseminated, don't leave it for a rollout. I've just, again, on a values thing, just watched a rollout where halfway through the rollout, the message is lost. But no one knows that, because the rollout's relentlessness going over 13,000, 14,000 people all over the place. And actually it's just mistranslated, because managers, leaders aren't stepping up to that middle piece of saying, well, what does this mean really for us? How are we using coaching better? We know that there's much better ROI from coaching than there is from just standard training. It's certainly from online training. And yet, how often do we use coaching well? Because the ROI seems less, but it's actually more. And if you use coaching with training, the ROI is even more enhanced. But if you don't embed the training or the learning and if we don't actually have accountability for proving impact, well, why do the training or development in the first place? Obviously, build personal resilience and make sure you can audit toxicity in your teams. Yeah, as someone once said, to reduce it rather than enhance it. I think that's the statement of the obvious, but perhaps not. And again, the Green Cross Code, look both ways and listen. Please don't think that I have forgotten duty of care. Whilst we talk about people who are, and the need to be more adult for people, we have to give them the skills to be adult themselves and deal with their leader. This is not permission to strop around, to yell at people, to bully them, and just to say, crack on without any developmental support. It's about knowing our duty of care. It's about making sure that the pendulum, which is somewhat swung in some organisations to being quite happy-clappy and soft and fluffy, to a more balanced way. But it's also in some organisations who have got a bit shouty and stampy, and it's about pulling it back to the middle, realising that doesn't help resilience if you're closing down sensitive people, if you're not creating an environment where those people with high potential can really thrive. So I coach someone who really hates the word culture, and gets quite cross with me when I talk about it, but it really is about culture. Leadership begats culture. And if you've got a culture that you're not happy with, you've got to look to yourself first. And I think tough love starts with yourself. We use the phrase, it's time to get a grip. It's time to get over yourself. It's time to get out of the way of yourself. And I think it's time to get that in our cultures. So, that's some thinking in terms of where we're developing leaders today. And I really hope there's something there for you to give you an idea of our approach and our starting position for this. I mean, this is a free webinar. We also have a bunch of free podcasts that talk a lot more about resilience. We have courses, we have ebooks, some of which are paid and some of which are free on our sites. And hopefully you can just begin to engage with the subject. If you want to talk more of us, you're more than welcome to give us a call or go onto our websites at qedod.com or our website that's focused more about personal resilience for individuals, and touch base with us. I'm just recognizing time rocking and rolling on, and hopefully just wishing you well and thanking you for your attendance today. And we have many other videos in the series, so please engage with us, and we'd love to hear from you. And those of you on the chat roll who are chatting as well, and thank you for your contribution. Look forward to seeing you in the future. Bye now.